Hello everyone, and welcome to our online forum, Are You Too Busy to Improve? I'm Matt Hobson-Rohrer from Simulate, and in the next 30 minutes we are going to talk about process improvement and how you might sell it within your organization, and also give you an example from one of our users. So welcome. I'm going to start off here with a little bit of introduction. We'll take about 5 minutes to do that. And then we'll talk about how you find time and justify simulation and process improvement. And then Steve Napier is going to speak with us about Lean Six Sigma and how simulation can help in that process. We've intentionally structured this webinar today to be 30 minutes to fit it into your very busy day. And we started at 15 minutes later than normal webinars, so that if your last meeting ran over, you could attend. And we're going to end at 15 minutes before the hour, so you're not late to your next meeting. We appreciate how busy you are. A little bit of logistics about the meeting. We will make these presentation materials available to you, and also a recording of this presentation if you would like to forward that along to a colleague or a manager. We'll also follow up with an email with some of the links that we talk about during the presentation, so you don't have to try and race and write down all of those links. And then as you're using the GoToMeeting technology, if you find the control panel and keep that chat window open, as questions come to you, please do type them in. We will keep our eye on those questions, and we will answer as many of those as we can at the end of the session. A little bit more about myself. I have been in the simulation community now for 26 years. Most of that time I've spent in manufacturing and material handling, order fulfillment, and scheduling. And I have a background in engineering and business. And if you'd like to know more about my background, you can find me on LinkedIn and also on Twitter at Matt_Simulate. So we're going to start off with a couple of polls, and we'd like to get some feedback from you as an audience. So the first question we're going to ask is your company doing enough around process improvement? So I'm going to go ahead and start that poll, and I'm going to leave it open for about a minute or so. So please reply as quickly as you can to that. And then we'll look at the results in just a moment. Okay. If you didn't get a chance to answer in time on this one, we'll do another question here in just a minute. But let me close the poll and look at the results. You display the results. Oh, I got to share. I'm sorry. Here we go. I'm going to go ahead and share those results. We can see that most people answered, yes, we're doing some process improvement. That's a great sign, but we could do more. 32% said, no, we're not doing enough. And 14% who are attending said we're not really doing anything. So that's encouraging. Let's go on to our next question. If you're not doing enough process improvement, why do you think that is? Could be lack of leadership support, perception of investment, just not enough time, which is why we're here today, or too focused on the short term. Okay, it looks pretty close. Interesting results here, which I'll go ahead and share with you all. So lack of leadership and being too focused on the short term seem pretty close to each other. And it's good to see that coming in third was not enough time, because that's what we're here to talk about. Good. Thanks for helping us with a little bit of feedback before we get started. I'm going to go ahead then and talk a little bit more about how you're going to find the time for process improvement within your organization. So I saw this weblog from Håkan Forss a few weeks ago, and it's become one of my new favorite weblogs, and I think he has a great perspective, but also he seems to be quite good with Legos as well, and this cartoon really resonated with me as we thought about this particular topic. We talk about companies who do a good job of making time to improve. I think Google is one a company that most of you have probably heard a lot about in their program for spending 20%. Employees can spend 20% of their time working on new ideas. A great example of that is one of the Google products called AdSense actually generates today about $50 billion in revenue for the company. So if you're trying to sell these ideas to your management, I think that's a pretty compelling story. Also Toyota, one of the leaders, of course, in process improvement over the years, they actually have a program where they pay employees overtime to work on approved projects. And Dr. Deming, one of the thought leaders in the process improvement space, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but one of his comments about this particular topic of not having enough time is, it's funny how we don't have enough time to improve, but we have plenty of time to perform work inefficiently and to resolve the same problems over and over again. I like this comment here. The "I don't have time" is kind of the grown-up version of "the dog ate my homework." One of the things you can do, looking at what you do today, is you want to carve out some time to do more in terms of process improvement. You might look at not just what you're doing, but the value that it adds to your organization, and then talk about that with your management. I've run into some people, some process improvers, who kind of go rogue within their organizations, and that's risky, but it's probably the best approach if you can to get management support. So I'm going to at this point, I'm going to talk about a five-step approach to building consensus within your company for process improvement. Step number one, don't use the word simulation. If you are trying to pitch simulation within your organization, one of the challenges I've seen in my experience is that a lot of folks already have a definition for what simulation means to them. And you'll see when I introduce Steve in a few more slides here that he's done some work in simulation that is an exact example of what I'm talking about here. So simulation can apply to airflow around vehicles, military simulators, weather and geologic simulators. I would propose you use a different term, and I would also invite you to come up with your own description for what you're trying to do. But I like the term predictive model or process model. I think that can help people understand exactly where you're going, and it doesn't have the same kind of built-in meaning that you see in the word simulation. That's the first thing I would. Step number one. Step number two, really understand your company culture and the company's tolerance for adding new technologies and being creative and collaborative, but also the company's attitude toward risk, and understand what that environment is. One of the tools I found that works quite well is you can search on LinkedIn and search for process improvement and your company name, and you can find people within your company who have already done process improvement within your organization. You could use those people to help build more support for it in your organization. You can also learn a bit more about the culture and history and what they've run into in the past. So LinkedIn, process improvement, your company name. For those of you who had to take thermodynamics in your engineering school, in your engineering program, I think you might find this interesting and a bit funny. I put this cartoon up here because in just a moment I'm going to use Goldilocks as a verb, and so that's why this is here. So not too hot, not too cold, but it's violating the laws of thermodynamics. So I think in a company what you want to do is you want to pick an application. You want to pick a problem that you'd like to solve, and I say Goldilocks it. That means it's not too big, it's not too small, but it's going to be the right size that will help prove how a predictive model can help in the process, but I would also recommend that if you pick a problem that's too small, then you might get a so what response from the stakeholders. So if anything, I would tend toward the bigger side for a problem, because that is where predictive models can provide more benefit and show you more possibility for return on investment. Then once you pick that process, I would use the 5 whys approach to really drill down into what you're going to get out of building a predictive model of this process. So the example here is we need to build a predictive model of process A, and then go through this process of 5 whys. Why are we going to do this? Well, we're going to introduce 2 new products next month. And let's get down to what the real value of this predictive model is going to be. Step 4, some of you have seen the framework for establishing SMART goals. So these are goals that are, of course, specific, can be measured, can be achieved, are realistic, and you put a time to it. Drive a stake in the ground and commit to when you can deliver the results. Then you've got to get in front of decision makers. You've got to get in front of your management. First thing is you've really got to know your audience. What are their hot buttons? What has been their experience with other kinds of introductions of new tools and technologies within your company? Some folks feel like when they get in front of the decision makers that that's the time when they need to show the simulation at this point. So, they're trying to get buy-in for building a predictive model, but they show a predictive model as part of that process. I would recommend doing that if you already know a tool and can use it and can do something quickly and can really have a demo of the predictive model come off cleanly. I would say if you don't know a technology already, then it's probably not the time to do that demonstration in front of your management. And then also you need to understand the risk tolerance and the budget, and you need to work within that framework within your company. Step 6. So if steps 1 through 5 fail, I'd say if it were me, I'd start a new job search. And I did a quick search today on LinkedIn, and I found over 2,100 process improvement specialist jobs. So I think there's an opportunity here. If you believe in process improvement, if you believe in the capabilities of predictive models to help in this realm, I think there's a good market for you. And if your own company, and I hope the managers on this call today aren't getting grumpy with me, but in the end, we all want to be happy in our jobs, and if you're a believer in process improvement, I'm sure you can find a place to work. All right, so I want to introduce Steve Napier. Steve is part of the Michigan Management Training Center, and he has over 20 years of software and hardware in the loop simulation. And as I mentioned earlier, he has experience building a full motion flight simulator. So he already has on his resume another definition of simulation that I referred to earlier. He's also spent a tremendous amount of time in the automotive industry and has a strong background in hardware and software product development. And he's currently doing Lean Six Sigma consulting and process improvement. Has a background in engineering, and he is based in Michigan. So Steve, I am going to go ahead and make you the presenter here.
Okay, very good then. Let me get my screen up here. You guys should all be seeing me. Oh, not quite yet, I guess. All right, so hopefully everyone is seeing me now. Hello, everyone from Plymouth, Michigan. My name is Steve Napier. I am a consultant here at MMTC. I wanted to give you a little background. I have been doing simulation for quite a while. And it's kind of funny when Matt asked me about that. I was like, well, let me stop and think about how long I've been doing simulation. And it was almost a little bit embarrassing to start. As we start to do this, I wanted to do a poll myself if we could and understand, maybe what's your experience in Lean Six Sigma and simulation. So I'm going to go ahead and launch my poll. I'm a newbie at this, so you'll have to forgive me. Hopefully I'll get this right. And so hopefully everyone's seeing the poll now. So the question is, how much experience do you have with Lean Six Sigma and simulation? Have you done some of it? Have you done a lot of it? Are you interested in it? I've got a few experts out there and stuff. We'll close the poll in just a second. This was kind of a new entry for me in doing simulation with Lean Six Sigma. And it looks like my numbers have kind of stabilized here, so I'll go ahead and share my poll. I'll close my poll and then I'll share it. Yeah, more than that. And so again, hopefully you guys are seeing this now. And so, it looks like some of you have done some experience as well, some have none. It's a great tool to start to think about doing some sort of process simulation as you think about your own opportunities for doing process improvement. So let me move into my you guys have already heard lots about me. So MMTC is part of a network called the Manufacturing Education Network. We're nationwide here in the U.S., and we provide a lot of really help to small to medium-sized manufacturers who otherwise probably couldn't get that help. And so we get involved with a lot of those manufacturers in terms of understanding what kind of process improvement do they want to do. So we deal with a lot of small family-owned businesses. They don't usually have a lot of resources available. They're typically 50 to 250 people. They're very risk-averse. And so when we start talking to them about opportunities that we might see for improvement, things like layout changes, reducing their finished good inventory, reducing their work in process, thinking about batch sizes and things, they have a really tough time visualizing what that might look like. And so we've been developing the use of process modeling here to really, to be able to show people, to demonstrate to them dynamically what that could look like if they were to start to embrace some of this technology. So I got involved with a really interesting project about a year ago. A colleague that I had formerly worked with called me up and said, hey, I see you've been doing some process improvement work. We've got a new paint line that we just put in, and we're looking to do some, we really want to document some standard work on how to load and unload this line. And so, I said, yeah, sure, we'll come out. It was on the other side of our state. And it was one of those problems where the deeper I got into it, the deeper the problem got to. The initial information it gave me is here on the screen. There were a lot of unique parts, up to 142 racks a day. Their cycle time was about 80 seconds per rack if the whole line was full, which means they could do up to 581 racks per day at high and low temperatures. Where it really got interesting was when we started talking about how much time it would take to load and unload racks. It could be as small as 30 seconds if the rack was full of big parts. And these racks were like 4 feet wide by 6 feet tall, so they were quite big. But some of the racks would hold like 800 parts. And so as we started to look at the static analysis that had already been done, we could see it was going to be a pretty intimidating task to try to figure out how to visualize the loading and unloading. Even worse yet, when I arrived at the facility to document their standard work, this picture, hopefully you can all see, shows what greeted me. And basically they had spent a lot of money on the paint line, but they had spent virtually no money on a process to load or unload those racks. And so it was pretty intimidating to get involved with this. Fortunately, I had a colleague here who had also done some work, and we actually got the job because we said, look, we know you've done a lot of great static work on this, but we want to do some dynamic simulation to understand the intricacies of what's going to happen. And so it was actually part of how my colleague sold a job to his bosses, was the fact that we were going to take it to the next level with doing some sort of dynamic process simulation. So the next slide kind of shows the model that we developed for the simulation. And it shows that this was the initial launch of the process, which had just a small number of parts, but there was still a lot of complexity in terms of the number of racks per day. We showed the low bake and high bake here as two different entry points into the system. Some of the racks had loading on one side, some had to be loaded on both sides. And so we simulated the buffer conveyor, the paint line, the drying line, and the unloading line here with different entities and simulate. And one of the interesting questions that Matt asked me was, well, Steve, how long did it take you to develop this model? And if you do simulation model, any sort of computer modeling like I do, you start out simple and slowly delve into the complexities of it. So I would say we had about 5 days worth of work in getting the model up and running, including some of the more complicated aspects of the model. So let me see if I can go ahead and run this. Let me get it over here on the screen where I want it. And so this is what the model looked like dynamically. And so hopefully you can see that all on your screens. I'm just checking my other screen here to see if I get any messages. So I'm going to go ahead and run this a little bit for you so you can see how we set this up. Basically, every part had its own load-unload time. So the way we did that is we set up the spreadsheet to show the timing for loading and unloading. And as you can see, there was a big difference between the load and unload time because when we were unloading, we also had to inspect and pack. And so if I run this model for you, what you'll see is first we go through and we drain out the low bake parts first. We get them all loaded onto the racks and loaded onto the line. And what you see happening in the conveyors simulated the time delay that the client would see, because one thing they had missed in their static simulation was an understanding that it would take about three hours to load up the line in the morning, and it would take up to 4.5 hours for the parts to come out on the other side of the line. And that was something they really hadn't accounted for much as they started to do their as they had done their static modeling. And so we were able to show them that. So we showed both the conveyors getting to the paint booth and then coming back out of the paint booth later on in the day. We were also able to demonstrate to them how many full-time equivalents they would need, how many full-time employees might be needed in order to try to load and unload the line, because that was a source of major discussion among themselves. The current line loading and unloading process was very people-intensive. It was just one of the most hectic operations I'd ever seen in my life in terms of the number of people grabbing parts off of a conveyor, inspecting them, and putting them away in the box. And we were hoping to maybe lessen some of that complexity as we operated the new line. So we had actually showed them using the FTE model that was here and simulate, what that would look like through the day. And so we needed maybe upwards of 7 or 8 people in the morning, but if we had as many as 10 people, we would still have some starvation going on in the afternoon. They also had an idea about everyone loading up the line and running over to unload the line. And so we had a conversation around, well, what are you going to do with the folks in between, and wouldn't it be better to have 2 crews on load even while you're unloading so it's ready for the next shift? So there were some really interesting developments that came out of the simulation that we did with this client. As a matter of fact, as we developed the model and we started thinking about the layout, the model actually drove our physical model for the layout of both material flow and people flow. You saw the picture earlier in my simulation about the empty room, and so we had a blank slate to start with, and sometimes that can be freeing, and sometimes it can be intimidating. So we came up with this model that you see on this slide, and they really liked it. They made a few tweaks to it, of course, but as far as I know, they've been running pretty smoothly with the model. But again, knowing how fast parts had to be loaded and unloaded drove things like length of conveyors and some of those kinds of things, and it also even drove order in which we were going to do some parts. And so again, this is one application of process modeling that we've used with clients. Russ Mason, who's a colleague of mine here, and I have been looking for more opportunities, but the real opportunity there is to be able to demonstrate to people what that looks like. So I don't know if we have any questions out there, Matt, about the process or the model. I've got my chat window up here.
Yeah. Not yet about the application that you've described, but let's just take a minute and see if any questions pop up. Another question that I had was, what challenges did you see as you were getting the client to selling the client on the idea of doing a predictive model? What did you see?
Well, this client was actually a little different than some of the clients that we deal with in the sense that they were a pretty big firm, and they actually had quite a bit of technical expertise of their own, but they were a firm who was also very much embedded in the status quo. And so they had the current model of loading and unloading right on the line, and that was a really hard concept for us to break with them. They really wanted to load and unload parts on the line. And even after we showed them the results of our model and reinforced it with the static model, they still had a hard time believing that they wouldn't be able to do it the way they'd always done it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good, good. We have one question that's come in already. If you have a question, let's find the questions window and go ahead and type those in right now. I'm going to go ahead and come back to another slide that I have while you consider your questions. And, so we do have one question, it looks like here. A couple questions now. So I'll go ahead and start with the first one. The question is, simulation and statistical design of experiments must be used together. Comments. I absolutely agree. No matter how good a model you build and how high performing a model you build, the real value from running a simulation comes from doing as many what-if scenarios as you can and really testing the boundaries of sensitivity analysis and the randomness in the model and everything else. That said, you need to kind of bound the problem a bit and think about what are the real important inputs or factors in the model and what are the responses from that model, and really need to spend some time, just like you would when you build a simulation, you spend some time designing it and putting thought into the conceptual model before you build a predictive model. Likewise, I think you should spend some time when you can, including people who have a background in design of experiments and can help put some boundaries around the kinds of what-ifs that you might run. Any comments on that, Steve?
No, I think you're right. I think realizing the ability of simulation, and there's some questions in here about experience and things like that. I think it really helps you reinforce and think about sort of what you're planning to do and what potentially could go wrong, especially as you consider the variation in what you're trying to do.
Okay, great, great. Next question is, can people steps be modeled, such as engineering, programming? Steve, you want to start with that one?
I'm sorry, I'm smiling because, yeah, that's actually an area that we find the most. I mean, when we talk about process improvement, a lot of folks think about manufacturing, of course. But some of the bigger projects I've done in process improvement have been on what we call the carpeted side of the business. And because the variation between, for example, in product development, so it's from the conceptual side of marketing and sales to what it takes to get through engineering and prototype developments and things, it's absolutely a fantastic model to understand what your current state is and potentially how, where the biggest areas are for improvement.
Yep, yep, good. Good. Next question is, this is one for you, Steve. Can you give an approximate investment costs and total hours spent to complete your work for this client?
No, I probably couldn't because, again, this was also my first foray into using Simulate. I'd used some other software packages in the past. And so I considered the project that we had to kind of pay for our investment with Simulate, and it very well did. But there was a lot of development time in here, and again, my first expectation was the model would be quite simple, and that wasn't a good expectation. It actually challenged some of my skills in simulation, but again, the Simulate tool was great, the support was great, and so it turned out pretty well for us.
Great, appreciate that. So I just want to wrap up here. We promised we'd finish up at within 30 minutes on this webinar, so we're just about to that point. But I want to point out to you that you can find us on Twitter, and in upcoming events, if you find that you can't fit one of our online forums into your busy schedule, if you follow us on Twitter, you can see kind of live updates from these online forums. So it's a good way to kind of keep in touch with what's happening when we do these online forums. Just a reminder, our 2014 release we made a few weeks ago, and there is a webinar recording available on our website, and in our follow-up email we will send you out the link to that so that you can learn more about what's new in Simulate. We have another online forum coming up in a few weeks, April 23rd. And so hope that you can spend some more time with us. If you have some ideas or some questions that you'd like us to answer in these sessions, we really would value your feedback and some guidance on what you'd like to know more about. Also, we have a training class coming up next week in the Detroit area, April 15th and 16th. There are still a few spots available there if you'd like to learn more about Simulate. And we will be at the Institute of Industrial Engineers annual conference at the end of May, and we're holding 2 events there, a lunch get-together where we're going to talk about case studies, and then a breakfast meeting where we'll do some training in new features and best practices using Simulate. So again, we really appreciate your time today. We're glad you could join us, and please do forward this recording along to a colleague if you think it would be valuable to them, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care, everyone.
Bye now.
And thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.